Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Coder Conversations. Today, we have Adan Huerta, Senior and Lead UI Developer. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your background? How do you get into coding? What made you want to become a programmer?
Yeah, yeah. So I was just talking about it just a little while ago. So yeah, I uh, started my journey about 8 years ago at a coding boot camp. Prior to that, I didn't have a lot of coding experience. I've always liked computers. I took like one computer science, an intro to computer science class in high school. That's about all the background experience I had. Um, and started out with a front end web development course and just kind of fell in love with it. You know, um, learned a lot of like the basics, your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all of that. Played with a lot of React, doing all that. Um, and then continued on down the front end development, UI development path, and started working for a few different companies, starting in like digital marketing, smaller companies like that, moving up to like oil and gas, energy, uh, some airline industry, and things like that. So
That's
yeah,
awesome, man.
yeah, I've worn a lot of different titles, but always been in the front end space. So it's like front end developer, UI developer, cloud software engineer, things like that. But always primarily working in the front end. It's what I love to do. It's what I try to stay in to the best of my ability.
Makes sense.
Absolutely. So did the boot camp you attended, did it teach you enough to prepare you for the industry?
Oh man, that's a good question. So like I would definitely say it teaches you how to teach yourself a lot of stuff. Um, there were definitely people in my cohort. Let me start by saying we had a cohort of about 14, 15 people in there. Um, and I myself uh, had struggled a lot to grasp a lot of the concepts, if I'm being totally honest, at the beginning. Um, and some of that has to do with like other things that I had going on in my life at the time. But all of that to say is that all the tech stacks that we learned were very very useful, and it kind of opened the door to of finding out like if I'm stuck on something, where to look, what to Google, which questions to ask on Stack Overflow. I think more than anything, that was probably some of the most valuable stuff we got out of that bootcamp. Um, Aside
That's
from learning
awesome.
like the
That's
straight up
awesome.
hard skills and stuff, you know. So
Right, right.
yeah, so it took me a couple of months after the boot camp before I started my first job. Um, so the boot camp itself was 3 months. I actually continued studying there for another couple of months to kind of like hammer down some of the stuff that I may have missed in the early part of the course, and then just kept interviewing and practicing for another, I think maybe 3, 4 months after that, and then is when I landed my first job.
Interesting. So when you landed your first job, do you feel like that company was pretty supportive towards juniors? Like, did they have seniors overlook you and kind of keep you on track and help you out when you need it?
Um, yes and no. So my first job, I was super, super grateful for because of the fact that the interview, I remember the interview, it went really well. They knew that I had a lot of things that I still needed to learn. But I guess they liked my personality and just kind of my, willingness to kind of get in there and learn and dig and do I guess the hard part, just trying to like figure things out. Um, and
Right.
they just kind of just threw me into the deep end, honestly. Like I remember it was for a digital marketing company, and right out the gate, they gave me the keys basically to like 4 or 5 different WordPress sites. You know, I hadn't worked with PHP before. If you've ever worked with that, a lot of the stuff under the hood is run by PHP. I hadn't worked with PHP before, but they were like, you'll figure it out. And so, there's this like, oh shit moment, right? I'm sorry if you can't curse. But
Right. No, it's okay.
yeah. Yeah. So there was that like, oh crap moment where I'm like, okay, all right, this is for real now. So definitely the pressure was on, but it was also an excitement for me because it was like, oh, cool, a new challenge, and this one I'm actually getting paid for,
Right.
So this is that was like the big light bulb moment for me. I was like, oh, I didn't know it then, but this is going to be the job for the rest of forever. You're going to get thrown in. There's going to be problems. You don't know the answer right away, and then you figure it out. And so like that's kind of.
What would you say the type of advice you had for junior developers or entry-level developers trying to break into the industry right now? What kind of advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I would definitely say is to have an open mind, and if you have an ego, try your best to temper it. Because this industry has a really good way of humbling people, I think. At least it did to me, right? Like you think you'll know everything, and then you'll be proven wrong. And you'll no matter how experienced you get, no matter how good you get at it, there's always a new answer or a new tool or some approach that maybe you didn't think about. And you have a chance to learn if you let it be that. I think if you can go in with that mindset, like you're gonna be a sponge, and that's what you should be. If you're a junior getting into the field for the first time, just focus on being a sponge. Take everything, and let go of the things that prevent you from being that.
I mean, that's pretty much what I did in my internship. I was doing front end React with Tailwind CSS. So I was really diving into Tailwind and trying to figure out like, oh, how do I make this look like this? How do I make this look like that? And, it took a lot of digging into the documentation for Tailwind.
For sure.
So how long did it take you to move up to the ranks of a senior developer and then eventually a lead developer?
So let's see. Officially, I didn't get a senior title until I think year 6. I think year 6 is when I got a senior title. But I kind of feel as though I was already doing some lead stuff before that, right? So, for example, one of my, you could consider it, I guess, a junior or mid-level position. I got an opportunity to run an internship, or I guess be a teacher, or I guess like a teacher's aide, I guess you could call it, in an internship that one of my companies was running. And it was a really cool thing where they would actually hold a class and they would teach students how to code in Angular. And they would all come in and they would use the app that my team was building as the boilerplate, or like, this is what it should look like by the end of the 2 or 3 weeks that you guys are going to be here. And so I helped teach that, right? So like that
now
was just
Angular 2.
Yes.
Okay.
At the time, I think it was Angular 8. I think that's the version they were on, I believe. Yeah, so like, that opportunity came up. It wasn't in my job description. It wasn't anything that I had to do, but it sounded like a really cool opportunity. If nothing else, than to break up, the day-to-day, right? I was like, okay, cool. I'll spend a couple hours in this classroom and just like hang out with a bunch of college grads and stuff. This is cool.
Sure.
And so it gave me this kind of like exposure to start doing more lead stuff. And before I was doing, before I got the title, I felt like I was already doing these things. You know what I mean? So,
And I think that's probably pretty
yeah.
common, don't you think?
Well, I would say that the opportunities are there if you're looking for them. If you're open to them, if you want to take that. I don't speak for all developers, but like, you know,
Right.
some people maybe are not interested in doing something like that. Maybe they'd rather focus on delivering features or, you know, just building out stuff rather than, you know, taking those kinds of opportunities, right? But
Like
I
leading a
think,
team, you're saying.
yeah, or you know, just leaving it to somebody else. Oh, someone else will do it, or you know,
Right.
the more senior guy will do it, or I'm not good enough to be this, so let someone else better do it, right?
Sure.
And you know, and that's not to say that I came in there thinking like, oh man, I know what's best, I can do this best, right? Like, I think we probably, at least I do, have a lot of like imposter syndrome that I deal with when I work with there. So some of it comes from a place of like, let me just see if I can, you know, and then, you know.
Yeah, I think a lot of us
Build from there.
programmers, we do develop imposter syndrome because we're always learning the next best thing, the next best thing. But then we're like, you know, can I do this? How well versed am I in Angular or React or whatever?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's like you're forever being a student, right? So like, when do you get to be the master, right? If you're always being a student,
Right.
but and maybe you never be the master, but if you're just a really good student, I think that's a good place to be too.
Yeah, you brought up a really important point about being proactive. It's kind of easy to get on the job and just wait for tasks to be assigned to you. But yeah, I do feel like if you want to really rise up and get in those leadership positions, you have to go above and beyond what's typically asked of you. Is there any other advice that you would give somebody who's kind of in a junior position and they want to, you know, go up to senior or lead developer? What are some of the things that they need to be aware of?
Yeah, for sure. I think if you want to make it there, if you want to get to a senior position, you know, right? Like, think about why you would want to get there in the first place, right? Like, if it's for the money, cool. You know, if it's for leadership, cool. Like, if it's because, you know, talking to business analysts and stakeholders and being in meetings and stuff and talking more about like planning projects is more interesting to you than coding, you know. um, Understand that there are trade-offs when you go up. The higher you go up, you know, the more you go to senior development positions, the maybe the less coding you'll be doing. And that's, sometimes I don't know that everyone's aware of that, but that's why I started this off by saying like, I try to stay in what I do the most I can because that's where I like to be. um, but definitely just be willing to learn. Like, if you came from a boot camp, this is why I think like people who came from a boot camp background actually have a really great advantage, is because you get used to the like the sipping from the fire hose kind of pace of it all really early on. And
Sure.
if you can continue that kind of like mentality of like taking in a lot of information, but like knowing that it's going to take some time to distill it and you're going to have to like mull
Like
over it,
being humble about it.
being humble about it, and also like just, you know, understanding it's going to take time, but you're still willing to put in that time to understand something. And that doesn't mean being a master at it, but just being proficient enough at it. You know, you might
Sure,
be the
sure.
only, you might be the only one on your team who knows, you know, whatever the latest framework is. Maybe you're the first person on your team to learn TypeScript or something, right? And you know, you've only spent 3 weeks with it, right? And but to your team, you're the leader on it now, right? You know more than anybody
Right,
else does. You could be the
right.
one to start introducing and cleaning up your code base and, you know, enforcing types and making things nicer and things like that, you know. Like that, those are, I think those are the opportunities that like I was mentioning earlier, like you could be that if you want to.
Now, are you working with TypeScript currently or JavaScript?
So because of Angular is written in TypeScript, so it's kind of like a package deal. You have to learn TypeScript if you're using modern Angular.
Oh, that makes sense.
So yeah, so I spend a lot of time writing TypeScript. A lot of time writing some, going back and learning some vanilla JavaScript when I'm like practicing algorithms and stuff. But yeah, a lot of time working with TypeScript.
So how important is learning data structures and algorithms to finding a job? Like on the interviews that you've been in, did you have a lot of those leak code style problems?
Oh man, I hate those. uh,
Yeah, those are the
yeah,
worst. Huh?
I'll tell you right out the gate. I really dislike those kinds of questions when it comes to interviewing. Rarely does it come where any of that becomes very like applicable in the real world. In my experience, anyway, right? Like maybe other fields need it much more than my field does, but um, I have only recently, honestly, found out how useful learning a lot of it can be. I've always been familiar with data structures and algorithms and things like that. But when you spend a lot of time in any framework or library like React or Angular, you kind of don't need a lot of it because the framework does so much for you, right? Um, which is better, that's good and bad, right? Like if you can recognize that you can be like an Angular or React master but suck at algorithms, like that's a thing, right?
Right, of course.
But I'm starting to understand now that some of the problems that I'm actually um, about, I think 60% done with the algorithms course that I've been taking for a while. But I'm learning a lot of stuff in it that's actually really cool. It kind of opens your mind to how problems are solved and why performance issues happen.
That's
That
awesome.
like, and sometimes the thing in even the docs in your framework might not provide you a solution, right? Like it's going to try and fix it the React way or the Angular way, right? And sometimes it's a little simpler than that. And if you understand like what it's all running under the hood, if you can understand JavaScript algorithms and things and figure out which like sort might work better and things like that, you can start to implement your own solutions. And that's what's like really blowing my mind right now. It's like, wow, like there's a lot of creativity in our jobs. And I think that's really cool.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the more other foundational topics that developers should start learning to stay relevant? Because if you focus just on frameworks, once that framework goes out of vogue, then if you don't have any other skills, then you possibly might be out of a job. So what should coders do to stay relevant?
Yeah, so I mean, it all depends, right? Like what you're building, right? Like, I have people who ask me all the time, like, I want to learn coding. I'm like, cool. What do you want to learn, right? Like that's a really loaded thing to say, right? You could build games, you could build web apps, you could build all sorts of stuff, right? And that's all going to tell you what language you should be learning. But let's say like if we're just talking about web development, because that's what I do, right? Definitely learn JavaScript like really well. Like know all the ins and outs of arrays and objects and all the tricks that you can do with them, you know, your operators, things like that, falsy, truthy, things like that, comparisons.
Right.
You learn all of that stuff so you know it really well. And what it helps you to do is you can start to read other people's code at a much higher level. And then you can start to identify like what are these functions doing? What are these modules? What are these components? Why are we doing things this way? And then
Sure.
like for example, when I start on a project, anytime I join a new team, you spend the first few weeks just reading code, right? Like most of the time they're not going to throw you in and start, oh, go build this thing. And it's like, oh, well, like it's a 3,000 line code base that I don't know anything about. Like,
Yeah, it's funny. My programming job was like that. They just threw me the code base. They're like, all right, start building out features.
Yeah. I don't know much about it, but I would say that's a red flag. But
No, well,
sometimes.
I quit after 2 weeks. It wasn't the right fit. There was no mentor. I was a junior developer, junior React
Oof,
developer, and there was just no mentorship to be had.
oof, yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, and I've been there before too. Unfortunately, like, it sucks when you get thrown in there. I think especially for juniors, having somebody, um, a senior there who's um, open to answering questions and doing that is like not only like it makes the
That's
team work
huge.
better, but it's huge. It's like probably one of the greatest blessings you can have as a junior developer is having someone who has that patience and willingness to like foster a good team, right? And
Yeah, because like
so,
I asked the senior developer, like, oh, can you mentor me or can you kind of show me the ropes? And he was like, oh, well, I can't, they're not going to let me come off of my project. I need to stay working. So, basically, he said he doesn't have time to train me, and no one else there was going to train me either.
hmm, hmm. Yeah, yeah, it can be difficult for sure. Um,
Yeah, I know it's important to foster an environment where newer developers, they feel welcome. They don't get caught up in imposter syndrome, and they feel like they're making progress. What are some of the steps that you took to make sure that the younger developers that they didn't get out of sorts?
um, yeah, so a lot of that I think just comes down to like simple communication skill stuff, you know? Like a lot of us work remote, right? So it's easy to put like the busy sign on your Microsoft Teams, right? And just say like, no, don't bother me, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It,
sure.
that's like the virtual my door is closed, right? And so like
Right.
for example, I try to keep it green like all day, as long as I can, right? Like when I'm not in meetings and stuff. And so like and this is all like opinion based. There's a lot of developers who say like, no, I need my heads down time for sure. Absolutely. Take your focus time. Absolutely. You need to block off times to get stuff done. Right. But I make it apparent to the people on my team that if they have a question, they can reach out. Right. And you know, it's some of the best teams that I've worked on, and we have like our own front end like group chat, right? Like it's just imagine all the group chats you have with like your friends or your family, whatever, right? Well, we have that where it's
Right.
like none of the PMs are on it, none of the managers are on it. It's just us, right? So it's kind of like a less stressful place where like, hey, how are you doing on that bug? It's like, did you figure out what you needed on that? Like don't worry about like looking bad in stand up or whatever. Like how are you doing on that thing? And then once you kind of like establish that trust and kind of like people can kind of start to lean on you a little bit or open up and start to stuff, you start to learn a lot from each other when you don't have that pressure to always like act like you know all the answers all the time, you know.
Right. So you can just kind of hang out and, get to know each other and start to learn from each other.
Yeah, yeah, because not to spend any more minute talking on this subject, but like the lead code kind of things, when you do a live coding session for a job interview, not only is it not realistic, but it's really high pressure, right? Like I don't know about you, but like that's pretty anxiety inducing to have somebody watch you do a very
Oh,
complex
yeah,
task while you're trying to
absolutely.
solve a very complex problem, and then somebody's
Yeah.
grading you on it. Like,
Right.
geez. So
Well, like
like,
if you've ever interviewed for, FANG companies, like I interviewed at Google and they had me doing
ooh,
algorithms and data structures and I was just overwhelmed in the interview. I didn't do well.
wow, I mean, good on you, or congratulations for making it to the interview round. I've applied for them before. I hadn't got a call back, but that's awesome actually.
Yeah, well, I used to network like crazy, like every day on LinkedIn, just trying to get jobs, and eventually, I guess I got on their radar somehow.
Yeah, that's awesome. I bet it was a really great learning experience.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
So yeah, moving on. I know etiquette is a two-way street. So for junior developers, sometimes they might get stuck on a problem. How long should they work on a problem before reaching out to a senior, and how should they approach the senior? I know like it helps if they've done a good amount of research.
Yeah. I think that's another good question because it's like it's all dependent on the bug or the thing that you're working on, right? Like, but I would say try not to spend more than like a few hours or a day on it, because some things can take days to complete or whatever. But if you're really hitting a wall, I would say maybe after a couple of hours of really sitting down and working on it, and like maybe you got it half working, or you got some of it done. That way you can start to explain the problem to who you're going to ask. I think is a really good start. I think if I'm going to throw out a number, I would say, I don't know, between 2 to 3 hours or something, if you're just like hitting a wall, right? But the real answer is it just all really depends, right? But more important than the time that you spent on it, I think, is um, the amount of things that you've tried to implement on your own. That way the person helping you can also not tread down the same paths, you know you're
So
helping them help you.
are we talking like going through Stack Overflow posts?
Yeah, like Stack Overflow posts. Maybe you're implementing, I don't know, you're implementing a new library. Like, let's say uh, you need a screenshot library for your web app or something, right? You can, if you're using npm, right? There's hundreds of packages you could install to use that, right? And so you can run down
Sure.
and be like, hey, maybe I tried this package, this library, this library, this library, but I'm running into this and this. That way you can start to, like, the more you can provide to the senior or the lead or whoever's going to help you out is more important than anything right there, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right, because like, yes, you want to deliver your stuff, but you want to learn. I think more importantly, as a junior, right? Like, yes, you could get handheld and they could finish the bug for you, or build the thing for you, get your user story complete, and then you're done. But like, what did you learn? Right? Like,
Right.
how, what if you get another bug just like that? What are you going to do then? Right? Like, I think it's more important to focus on like the learning aspect of it than getting the thing done.
Well, it's kind of like, teaching someone to fish versus just giving them a fish.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So this is kind of a problem from a senior slash leader perspective. Okay, so code reviews are very common in most organizations. Um, so you say you're reviewing a junior's code. How do you avoid like making them feel like you're destroying their code, or you're coming after them? How do you do code reviews in a way that not only do they learn, but they don't get offended when you critique their code?
Oh yeah. This is a great topic too, because like, this, I think, is the biggest reminder at the end of the day of what we do for our work. Like, at the end of the day, you're still working with people. Um, it's all code, right? We're all doing computer stuff, but you're still just dealing with people at the end of the day, right? Um, when I review code, um, remember that. Remember that you're still talking to a human being with like thoughts and feelings and stuff like that, right? Um, I try to go through, if I see a bug, like, something's wrong with the code. I don't know, maybe they're not following a coding convention and stuff. It's usually some form of, please correct this on line, 149 or whatever, And if it's more complex than that, then I'll just lead with questions, really. Like, what is this function for? can we not do this way or whatever?
Sure.
Or have you implemented this service? This service does the same thing as this function or whatever like that, And I just lead with questions like that. Please
great.
and a
That's
simple,
great.
a simple please and a thank you goes a long way. I feel like, it's simple stuff, right? Like it's simple.
Well, like you
You're
said,
talking to people.
we're talking with people. We're dealing with people. Have some compassion at the end of the day.
Right. Like, remember that. Like, you don't know if that person was like, I don't know, their babies were crying and they're freaking, I don't know, their house AC broke and it was 120 degrees in their house and they're like sweating balls, like sitting here trying to put out a fire when they wrote that line. Like, you don't know.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
You try to do that. And if it's like a junior, like somebody new to the team, and like, let's say the review is just like it's just a really bad push, a commit, right? Like this commit is, I don't know, 200 lines and they affected 10 files or 15 files and it's just like really bad or something. Usually I'll PM the person, a PM message. And if it's just going to be like I could sit there and write 30 comments on their pull request and then wait for them to come back to me on it. And then maybe they ask me questions, or maybe they get embarrassed and then they don't ask me questions and then they take a week to come back to me on it. So what I would prefer to do is I'll just PM the person and be like, hey, do you have some time today? I wanted to go over, your pull request. And then I'll do like a pair programming session with that person.
That's great. That's a great strategy.
Yeah, I'll block out like an hour of my time to do that, right? And then we'll do that. And then on the next day stand up, when they ask like, what'd you do? It's like, well, I worked with, I'll say my own name. I worked with Adan on this bug, and we figured out what was going on with this, and we unblocked it, and right? And then I'll go in and update about my own stuff,
Sure.
So, and like that's where like it starts to become really important on how you use that time, right? Because when I do something like that, it also gives me an opportunity to find out if I can trust the person that I'm working with. Like, are they going to, I'm extending my hand, will they also extend their hand, right? Like, don't make me have to reach all the way in and pull you out, right? Like,
you want
meet me halfway.
Meet you in the middle, right? Meet you in the middle.
Yeah. Meet me in the middle, like work with me, show me that you're trying to learn, and that like I'm not just doing this for you,
Right, not just doing the work for the junior.
Right, because then at the end of the day, like you're not going to want to do that again. The time that I put aside, you're not going to want to do that again, right? And eventually, you'll have to report that to somebody, and I don't like doing that. That's the crappy part of our job sometimes, when you work as a lead and you're like, this guy's not really pulling his weight, or like that sucks. I don't want to be that guy. Like don't make me be that guy. I've had to, but I don't want to be that guy. So
absolutely. So like you mentioned something important earlier, which was like your attitude was one of the main reasons that you got your first job. So like when you're looking to bring somebody on your team, would you rather have somebody with a more positive attitude and less technical skills, or somebody who has higher level of technical skills, but they have more of that know-it-all attitude, where it's a little bit harder to get them to see it your way?
Oh man, so like this one, I guess it's really a big like personality thing, right? So for me, I want people on my team that I can talk to, that will be open about the things they're working on, and will kind of express their ideas and stuff. Like if you're stuck, cool, tell me, let's figure it out, right?
Sure, yeah.
So like if you can come in and just be like just a total badass, and you can just do a lot of this stuff on your own, but you're a jerk to work with, and I think we might have all worked with one of those or more of those. I personally,
absolutely.
I don't last long on those teams. I don't. I work as a consultant, so most of my work that I've done, is contract based, whether it be long term, full term, long term, short term contracts and stuff. But if it's a short term contract and I'm already getting that vibe where it's like, ah, man, like everyone or there, one guy is just being a tyrant on the team, and the company likes the way that this guy runs things. I'm like, okay, cool. As soon as this contract is done, I'm out.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah, and so like it's leadership styles, right? You got to look at who's in charge. How do they run their ship? And how do you work with that, right? I prefer people I can talk to that are a little like, you don't have to be 10 out of 10 technical. If you can come at me with like 6 or 7 or 8 out of 10, but like you're super open, chill to talk to, and you are willing to learn and figure it out along the way, 10 times out of 10, I'm going to pick that guy.
Yeah. Now, like my experience, I was only at this company for 2 weeks after my internship where I was doing React and Tailwind. And this company's like, oh, we use vanilla CSS here. So, you're going to have to do that. And I said, well, can I use Tailwind? I'm like well versed in that now. And they're like, oh, well, no, the client doesn't want that. They just want vanilla CSS.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that happens a lot. That happens a lot where like the tool belt that you came prepared with is not gonna be needed or wanted there, right? Like I mentioned on my first job, they threw me into the deep end of PHP, WordPress, and Drupal. I had never worked with any of that before. I thought, and being a naive bootcamp grad, you're like, doesn't everything work on React? Isn't everything JavaScript? And
right.
And then you find out, it's not, right. But your job isn't to build the best React app; it's to deliver products and deliver solutions, regardless of the language you use.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my time in programming, because there was no mentorship, it turned me away from the industry, and I switched over to technical recruiting for the next year.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's interesting though. So you do have a technical background, but then you're going into the recruiting side. So that's
correct.
Cool.
Yeah. I went to a coding boot camp and learned Java, Spring, and SQL. And then I taught myself JavaScript after that, because my tutor or the higher up at the school, my mentor, he said, okay, yeah, I know you just learned Java, but a lot of the jobs right now for Java are more mid-level and more senior level. If you want to find an entry-level job, you better learn JavaScript and you better learn React and Angular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an interesting point about the industry, is that the desirable technologies change so quickly. Like when I was coming into the industry, it was like Angular JS, so Angular 1, maybe Backbone, and then I got my first job doing Angular 2, but eventually React became in vogue. So technologies change so quickly. So how do you think developers should like stay abreast of the latest technologies and not get overwhelmed? Like how do they pace themselves to be able to continue to stay relevant in the industry?
Yeah, so that's an interesting topic too. Like, so I've fortunately spent a lot of time working with Angular, like for a long time. And fortunately, Angular has been useful and popular enough that there's a lot of jobs with it, right? Like it's backed by Google, right? Like it's got the huge backing behind it. It's a huge, very structured framework. A lot of huge enterprise level companies have a proven track record of delivering with Angular. So it has a good ecosystem, and so the jobs are there, right? But if ever, yeah, so like if ever I got the feeling that like you look at the trending jobs report, or if I just start noticing that job listings just don't have Angular anymore, that would be a sign for me to start like picking up something new and then like going in all in on that, right? Like if somebody
Like
told me,
switching to React, for instance.
sure, React or like, any of the other frameworks out there, like if somebody told me that like TypeScript is going to die completely and it's all going to be replaced with just vanilla JavaScript or like whatever, then yeah, I would go all in on just learning everything vanilla JavaScript and doing it that way, which I think is a good thing to know regardless. But um, I try to be, I try to look ahead a little bit on those decisions, and have a little bit of a focus, a direction, if I'm going to learn something, right? Like I don't like to spend time learning things without a purpose in mind with it, right? Like learning for the sake of learning is awesome, but like try to be smart about it, right? There's only so many hours in a day. There's only so much time in your career, you know. Nobody likes the feeling of burnout, right? Of just spinning their wheels, you know. If you, I like to imagine like if you're in a rowboat or something, you don't want to be like lost at sea in the fog and just like find out that you've been going in circles, right? Like you treaded all this water and you feel super sore and you feel like you did all this work, but like where'd you go, right? So I try to think of it that way. Like for example, like for my first job that I started working with Angular, right? Like I got that first job. My boot camp didn't teach Angular. They didn't teach TypeScript. They didn't teach Angular. It was a full React course. And so in my area, in Houston, right? Like there weren't that many remote jobs. Like this is pre-COVID times, right? You got to remember the remote job percentile was a lot lower, especially for a junior, right? Like no one's going to let you work remote without proving anything.
No one wanted to hire juniors remotely before COVID, at least.
Yeah, like it wasn't a thing yet, really. And so for me, after the boot camp, I went out, I started looking at all the job listings. I noticed there's a lot of ASP.NET, C#, and Angular jobs in my city. So I picked one. I said, I think I looked at like a 30-minute or an hour video on C# and ASP.NET. Like, what is it? What does it do? What do you need to learn? And same thing for Angular. And then I said, okay, I pick Angular. And then I just went all in, learned TypeScript, built like a Spotify clone app with it, and then like put it on my portfolio. And I was like, okay, cool. I can now put this on my tool belt. And then that's what ended up getting me my first job. Actually, I remember the technical director was super interested himself in Angular, and he wanted to talk to anyone who actually spent like a decent amount of time working with it. And so my interview was like 80% just me talking about that Spotify app.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
And it was a really great opportunity because I'm talking to a technical director and now suddenly I sound like an expert because I'm talking about something he hasn't even touched yet.
Oh, wow.
So like it put me in this position where like I'm a junior, I don't have a professional record yet, but I sound really, really, experienced in this realm. And so
good way to market yourself, good way to network.
Absolutely. It let me set myself apart, right? Because there weren't a lot of Angular developers, at least in my city 6-7 years ago, at that level, coming in as a junior, not asking, like I didn't come out the gate demanding 6-figure salaries and stuff. Like I kind of kept my expectations low. I was like, look, if I can just do a lateral move salary wise, but started in this industry, like give me it, right? Like I wasn't trying to just.
Yeah. Like you got to get your start. You got to get your start somewhere.
Exactly. And so I think like the combination of like the value I was proposing for the price point I was proposing made me attractive, I guess, in their eyes.
That's
Yeah,
smart.
that's
Yeah.
that's a very good point of like choosing a technology that is sort of newer but is really emerging, because that's really how I was able to make progress so quickly, was because I was using Angular 2 while it was in beta. So,
Oh, yeah.
next job, even though I was like only had like a year of experience, like you mentioned, I was kind of like considered an expert in it because nobody else had more experience than me in that, because I was using it since it was in beta. So I think for like a lot of people getting into the industry, choosing an emerging technology that's starting to gain popularity is a good way to get in, because you're not competing against like a guy with like 10 years of Java Spring experience.
Yeah,
And that was
absolutely.
my experience. Yeah, that was my experience. Getting out of boot camp, there were no entry level junior Java Spring jobs. So I had to go out and learn JavaScript for sure.
Hmm.
So yeah, the final question for me is, mental health is a lot of times overlooked in this industry. What do you recommend developers to do to stay balanced? And if they're in a toxic workplace, do you recommend like them immediately starting to look for another job, or like how do you recommend that developers stay sane, especially in a fast-paced industry like tech?
Oof, man. Yeah, there's I feel like you could write a whole article about that, because like there's the simple stuff, right? Like, you know, make your office well lit, right? Like get sunlight, eat right, try to work out, do those things, right? Those are like the simple building blocks, right, of any like decent life, I think. But more importantly than that is just um, to have like a code that you want to live by, or to have standards in such a way that you try not to break them for anything, right? A job can be pay really well, but you have an asshole for a senior who like is just making your job hell or something, or you just have a manager who doesn't know personal boundaries, calling you on the weekends, texting you after hours, things like that. You got to know when to draw the line, right? And that I think can be tough for some people to stand up for themselves and kind of say no.
And I
Um,
think we've all had a boss like that where they're trying to text us after work. They're trying to reach out to us over the weekend. It's like, come on, dude. Like,
yeah,
I'm not on the clock right now. I'm not on the clock.
yep, yep, absolutely. And it happens a lot. And it's unfortunate because I think as much as I love this industry, I really do. I think the people that work in this industry tend to they tend to be more on the introverted side, maybe like conflict averse. You don't want to rock the boat, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to cause trouble. So you kind of just do what you need to do to avoid the conflict, right? But at the cost of yourself, oftentimes, right? And
Yeah.
so,
And I
like,
would agree with what you're saying. Most programmers are introverted by nature.
yeah, yeah, and like nothing wrong with that, absolutely. But it just, I think certain managers know that, and they take advantage of that, and they
Yeah.
will kind of push and ask and keep pushing and keep asking, and then the others don't ever say no, or they don't really kind of stand up for themselves, right? So like,
Like they don't know that they can say no.
yeah, exactly. Like some of them wouldn't even consider it an option to say no to like staying late on a Friday afternoon, or like working a weekend or something like that. It's like, dude, you can say no. The managers, like,
Yeah.
it's the job of the manager to figure out how to deliver things. Like our job as developers and engineers is to solve problems within our budget and within the time we're given and what we're paid for, right? But like if the manager can't also figure out how to lead a team properly, or focus on the right things on the right time, then that's, I don't want to say it's your problem, right? Because we're all in the ship together. But like, sometimes they need to also be let known that like, you know, me staying and working double weekends and stuff isn't going to be the answer, right? So,
Right.
and then maybe you sit there and you talk with your PM and figure out another solution. Like, hey, maybe we need more developers on the team. Maybe have we figured out, is there
Something as basic, yeah, something as basic as that.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll appreciate. Oftentimes they'll appreciate you kind of like offering other ideas, offering other solutions, and not just like jumping on the grenade every time, and be like, I'll do it, and
Sure,
then
sure.
and so, yeah, just having boundaries, man. It's easy to know when you feel like you're being taken advantage of, right? Like we all know what it feels
Right.
like. You have that gut wrenching feeling in your stomach. You're like, I hate this, right? And
It's like when you see it.
you know it when you see it, exactly. And so, like, if you listen to that, I think it's really easy to know where the line is and when to, say no.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just got one more question. I just thought about it. So you mentioned like a
Sure.
lot of programmers are introverts, which is true, but
Mm-hmm.
soft skills are extremely important in any career. So how do you recommend developers develop their soft skills, emotional intelligence, just their ability to be more social?
So I think a good way of doing it, right? Like I'm a big believer in like self-development and stuff. Like, I try to read as much as I can, audiobooks. I try to do things that like scare the hell out of me. Like I did the scariest thing I did in a while. No kidding. I did an improv class, where I had to like,
How'd that
stand
go?
up. Oh, I hated it. I hated it.
That's
Like
funny.
it was cool, everyone's just like standing up, making jokes, kind of like, letting down their guards and just being silly and talking to people and just kind of getting over their fear of talking to people and looking, getting rejection and stuff like that. But I realized that like I struggled with it a lot, you know
Sure.
but I did the class, and like, even though every time I was like, dude, um I, I do martial arts, by the way. I didn't mention that, but like I've done boxing as an amateur since I was like 16. It's like I would rather take punches from somebody than do this. Like
Right.
that's, to me, that was the scarier thing to do, and just doing stuff like that. But I would say is kind of extreme. You can do it much simpler by just like, spending more time doing more social events. Like I like playing like tabletop games, Dungeons and Dragons, group team video games and things like that. Like, do things that forces you to talk and communicate and work together on a common objective. If you get more experience doing that, even like in a game setting, it helps on the job for sure.
Like you're talking about stuff like World of Warcraft.
Yeah, World of Warcraft, like Baldur's Gate. I've been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate lately. Um, like Dota 2, or like League of Legends, things like that, or like, any team-based game, honestly. Call of Duty, whatever. Gears of War,
Sure.
that can be helpful.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true. You're working in a team context, so you definitely have to learn to communicate in order to, if you just want to win the match. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's definitely a way to be more social. But yeah, Brian, did you have any other questions? Well, I think that's everything from mine, man. We definitely appreciate having you on the show, man. I feel like this was
Oh,
an
sorry,
excellent
my mic
interview.
was muted there. Yeah, I guess the only other question I have is what is the most relevant or most important project that you've worked on?
The most relevant or important project. Hmm. I would probably say, um, one of my projects that I worked on, it was an Angular project I worked on for a big oil and gas company. Um, this was the first project that I worked on where I truly felt like I became proficient after it, right? Like if you watch, like, I don't know if you guys watch anime at all, but like you, after the hero goes on the training arc or whatever, oh, can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Okay. It looks like Brian lost audio. But yeah, I guess we can go back on the recording on this. So yeah, so like, you know, in anime or whatever, you go on the training arcs, the hero comes back and he gets like really strong, faces the new challenge and gets better, right? I think the big oil and gas project that I worked on was like that. We built basically like, we implemented AWS. We were using, you know, cloud containers, things like that, using like high-end GPUs to use a high-end 3D visualization service, and then built an Angular wrapper around it to give users access to like high fidelity images of the sea floor. Things that would not normally be capable in a web browser, because a web browser is not capable of that kind of, you know, rendering process power. But with the combination of tools that we used, we implemented this really very powerful tool in the web app. And then it was basically a module that worked as part of a whole suite of different apps. So we were only one piece of this like huge you know, monolith of different Angular applications working together. And it was just my first experience of really seeing the power of what we are building, what is capable of what we can do as developers and what we can build, right? Like that wasn't just implementing an Angular app. It was creativity that it took the architects to build such a big application, such a useful application in a way that I think a lot of people may not have thought was possible, right? So like we used, you know, we used all the latest in Angular and AWS and cloud services to do it, to build all this thing. So that was like, I think, a really big mind expanding moment of like, wow, you know, like this is really cool what we're building. And it also just like gave me a whole new set, like a new like horizon of ideas that is possible with what we're doing, with what we build with code.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, man. But yeah, man, I think this is a good ending point. We're at the top of the hour, man. We definitely appreciate you for coming through.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. This is really cool.
Oh yeah, man. We definitely would love to have you come back. Actually, you know, we're gonna go live again tonight. We're gonna talk about, you know, different gaming ideas. So if you want to pop in, you can pop in on that one as well. But yeah, we definitely appreciate you for stopping by.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's great talking to you guys. Hope to talk to you all again.
All right, you have a good one. Thank you everybody for tuning in. We'll catch